That's okay. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Between the Notes. I'm Mike Bolton. I'm the Vice President of Community Initiatives. And these are challenging times for all of us. And we hope that everyone is staying safe and doing your due diligence by washing your hands and also practicing social distancing. Of course, Opera Philadelphia is following city, state, and federal guidelines. All Opera Philadelphia staff are working from home. So if you need to get a hold of us, you can give us a call because all of our phones are run through our computers. So we have access to our phone lines. You can send us an email. If you have any questions, of course, you can always contact us. Now, earlier this week, Opera Philadelphia announced the postponement of Madame Butterfly. Of course, it was a very difficult and a sad decision, but ultimately that decision was made based on everyone's safety, which is our number one priority. Safety for you, our audience, the safety for our artists, and the safety for our staff. But this cloud has a silver lining. Madame Butterfly will come to the Academy Music stage in spring of 2022. I'm happy to say that all of the Butterfly artists have been invited back to perform their roles, and we hope that all of them will be able to return. Now, earlier this week, you received an email that mentioned that not having an opera this spring could be catastrophic for the company. It's a situation that could lead to revenue from ticket sales and philanthropy associated with it. But we have to say a huge thank you. So many of you have been incredibly generous in donating your Madame Butter tickets back to Opera Philadelphia. We just got a PDF about, an hour and a half ago showing how many people have returned donated their tickets back. It's really spectacular. And others are making contributions. If you are able to do so, please consider renewing your membership as an Opera Philadelphia member now, or making a gift to Opera Philadelphia. Everything counts and everything matters, and we thank you for everything that you can possibly give. Opera Philadelphia's strength is its family. And thank you for sharing your support with our artists, our staff, especially during this uncertain time. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Michael Bolton, the Vice President of Community Initiatives. You may know me from those phone calls you get when you buy tickets, reminding you that you have tickets to an upcoming show, or from lectures like the Opera Overtures talks, which happen in the Academy an hour before the performances. But I'm at home today, so my apologies if my dog comes in or barks or jumps on my lap, which won't happen, or the doorbell rings, but this is life as we know it today. So, please go with the punches as we will as well. And this is Between the Notes. So if you're not familiar with Between the Notes, the pre-production lecture open to donors of $100 or more. And during this COVID crisis, we wanted to extend the opportunity to everyone in the Opera Philadelphia family to be part of events like these, just so that we're all able to connect on different ways. So welcome to this event. And this is our very first virtual event. So this is exciting for me. It's exciting for Troy, our guest, and we hope it's exciting for you as well. There will be some other events coming up, so stay tuned for that information. And we hope you were able to find the link and get to YouTube easily. If you had any issues, if there's any challenges, in the chat section on YouTube, let us know what your experience is like and what we need to do to be better about communicating with all of you. And as I mentioned, there's a chat function. So this is an interactive event. If you have questions, type them into the chat section, and then we'll ask those questions and answer those as they come along. So please participate in this program. It's part of this event and part of what's an exciting virtual event as well. Now, usually for Between the Notes, we talk about our upcoming productions, but in lieu of a conversation of Madame Butterfly, today we're going to talk about singing. I've wanted to do something with singing for a long time. A vocal technique, we don't really get the chance to talk about it. Maybe we've heard about it, like so-and-so had an amazing technique. What's a good technique? And unless you've had lessons yourself, voice lessons yourself, or if you sing, you may not know how singers produce these magnificent sounds out of their bodies and their voices. So today we are very thrilled to have Troy Cook join us today. Let's switch over to share my screen for a second. But we're excited because you've seen Troy before. And if you've seen him before, you will know, you may have seen him in, let's go here. His first show with us was La Boheme, when he sang Marcello in 2006. He did Sharpless and Madame Butterfly in 2009 in the June Kaneko production. Then in 2012, he came back to do Lescaut in Manon Lescaut, and that with Michelle. Then 2012, later in the year, he did a new production of Puccini's La Boheme, that we did with art featuring from the Barnes Foundation and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Then in 2013, amazing world premiere or East Coast premiere at Kevin Puts and Mark Campbell's Silent Night, where he was Father Palmer. 2 years later, he came back to do a magnificent Posa of Rodrigo in Verdi's Don Carlo. Then the world premiere of Kevin Puts and Mark Campbell's Elizabeth Cree in 2017 as part of 017. Last year, he was, or 2 years ago, he was Lord Enrico Ashton in Lucia de Lammermoor in 2018. And then just last year, he brought his Marcello back again for La Boheme, again, just a year ago, this past spring. So we are thrilled to have Troy back with us, and he's working from home. He is also here to talk about vocal technique. You know, I have to say, thank you, Troy. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you.
Very, very good to be here. I hope everyone can hear me okay.
I'm sure they can.
Very good.
So every time you come and sing with us, there are singers who stand on the sidelines and talk about how amazingly you sing and how consistent your vocal technique is. Before we get started to talk about vocal technique, how did you get involved in singing?
Well, when I was a kid, like very small kid in nursery school, I discovered that I had an aptitude for music. I climbed up on the piano bench one day after nursery school, and I started to play a song that we'd learned that day. My mom comes into the living room and she's like, "Who taught you how to do that?" And I was like, "I don't know." So I guess for me, music has just always been something that's made sense to me. I've played the piano by ear, and I think that's where my first interest in music in general was. And then through high school, through singing in church choirs, high school chorus, and such, I discovered that in addition to like a musical ability, I also had a vocal ability as well. And so that's where my interest originally came from. Then when I went to undergraduate school, I discovered how much I love foreign language. So you take vocal ability and musical ability and you add foreign language into the mix, and opera's, I think, kind of the natural next step for me, or classical singing in general.
So when you started learning about vocal technique, what were the things that you really connected to and made you excited about singing?
Well, I think the most important thing about vocal technique is simplicity. When we're standing on stage or standing in a concert or a recital or anything, there's a limited number of things we can think about at one time. So if you are on stage at the opening night of a new opera, Don Carlo, say, and you're thinking about your soft palate and your jaw position and how deep of a breath you need to take, and then you have to follow the conductor, and you have to be in the right light. You have to, be with your colleagues. There's just too much. I mean, multitasking is one thing, but that is taking it to the next degree. So for me, we study in our voice studio, and we learn about breathing. We learn about how to produce the sound in a way that can project over an orchestra. And we attach all of those things to the expression in the music. So then when we're on stage, all we have to do is express what we're trying to say as our opera character, and everything lines up and your body knows what to do. So from the vocal training is mainly that process, taking your vocal technique and attaching it to the music that you sing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're in your studio, what are you working on? How are you making sure that your technique is, how well you even more basically, how do you define technique?
Okay, well, it's interesting. When you study music of any other kind other than vocal music, if you're studying the piano, if you're studying the violin, or any orchestral instrument, your teacher and yourself are able to actually see what's going on. So if you're playing the piano along and your wrist is too high, your teacher can say your wrist is too high, or they can say you need to change your fingering to get through that scale by using these fingers instead of those fingers. Or even with the violinist about fingering, how you're going to finger the strings, how all of that. Well, your voice is inside of your larynx, which is inside of your throat. And there's no one that can look inside and see, oh, well, your left vocal fold needs to come a little tighter to get that note just right on pitch. Because they are reactive muscles and cartilages and things in there. So we have to do things, and it differs for every singer. Language is the most important thing, I think, when you work on vocal technique, because you need to come up with ideas, concepts, and things, and physical things to do that make your voice react in the way that you want it to. You can't make your voice do anything. You have to allow your voice, you have to inspire your voice to do the right things. And for me, it's going back to how we came out when we were babies. The one thing that we've always been able to do from the second we appear in the world is speak. And if you're a newborn baby, you might not be speaking in a language, but you definitely make everything known. You can when the baby's upset, when the baby's happy. So for me, singing is based in speech. And the other thing too to point out is when you answer the telephone, usually you don't have to listen for the person to identify them to know who's speaking. When people, it's time to get their tickets and they hear the first two words out of Michael Bolton's mouth, they know it's Opera Philadelphia. It's Mike Bolton, immediately. So I think when you start with speech, you have that instant identity. And so with a singing voice, that's what you want. You don't want every soprano to sound exactly the same, or every baritone to sound the same. You want Cheryl Milnes to sound like Cheryl Milnes. You want Troy Cook to sound like Troy Cook. You need that identity. So when you start from speech, then you get that immediacy and identity to each individual sound. And even as a voice teacher, that's my ultimate goal, is to find a student's own personal original sound that no one has ever heard before. That's truly theirs.
So how have you worked on developing your technique? What are some of the technical things that you have to think about on it before we get to some questions, because we have a couple questions.
Sure. Well, when I say start with, it sounds very simplistic to say you just start with speech, but literally in the studio, when I start to warm up, I do something super simple: ni, ne, na, no, nu. And it's ni, ne, na, and then I'll say them together, like in legato, ni, ne, na, no, nu, so they connect. And then I add pitch, ni, ne, na, no, nu. So basically, it's a way to build from the speech sound into the singing sound, because singing is not speaking, because we do speak we sing in a higher register very often, especially if you're a soprano or if you're a tenor. And that's why very often you're able to understand the diction of mezzos and baritones. We don't have to work as hard to make our text understood because we sing in a speech range for the most part. Whereas soprano is up on, you know, a high Z and trying to, I remember my friend and my voice teacher was talking about, she had to sing the word "sue," and then I'll sue, on like a high F, like the Queen of the Night's high F. And she's like, how do you do that and be understood? But you know, you end up figuring it out. So let me see. I mean, it's hard to like boil it all into one sort of thing, but like starting with speech, then you take the speech and you support it with your breath, and there are ways to find for your breath to be moving. Sometimes with glissando, sometimes if you go ooh, in that sound, you can feel the breath. So then if you go from the glissando, ooh, you as a singer have a way to be able to feel the sensation of the breath moving and supporting your voice. So those are a few of the little things. Then you start to add more exercises that get you to go higher. So you're constantly extending that feeling of speech and moving higher and maintaining your breath support. And by doing those things, then you end up creating a sound that can project. And it's when you talk about projection, it's not just about a decibel level. There's so many more things involved. It's about acoustics and overtones. Like if you think a lyric soprano's high C, like someone who would sing me singing a high C, that's going to be pretty loud. But that same soprano could sing that same high C pianissimo, and the decibel level between the two are going to be different. But you're going to hear them both very clearly in the house. So if your projection is not just about decibel, it's about balancing breath and the way you support the voice. And there are technical things that we can learn about physiologically how things happen. The difficult part about that is we can't affect any. We can't say, oh, this cartilage needs to pull a little to the right to make we can't affect that kind of change. So that's where our language of how we speak. And there are some things we learn that that are reactive. Like I think of the mouth as a square. So when people talk about needing more space for a high note, I do a release back here at the jaw instead of here in the front. Because for me, then you end up with tension in your tongue here, and here you release, and it has a reaction of your soft palate going up all on its own without you having to think, oh, I need to raise my soft palate. Which when you do something like that, you end up using muscles to do that rather than it just being a reflex. And you can add tension in your sound that you don't want. So you can see it's not super simple. And these are the things we do in the studio to kind of figure out as we work through our music, how to attach these different ways of making our sound, or ways of singing that we attach to the meaning. And one other thing too, for me, the eval is very important because it has the most ping, the most squillo, if you want to call it. It's called so many different things in singing, but that cut, that thing that will carry your voice over the orchestra. So if you do I start my exercises usually with the vowel E, so that E resonance can be throughout all of the vowels. If that makes any sense. That is literally a Reader's Digest version
Well, you know
kind
what?
of what we do, but
We have a couple questions. Our first two questions,
sure.
uh, one from Maureen Craig, one from Don Cooney. They're sort of the same thing. But do you recall a specific moment when your technique saved you from, or help you recover from a mistake on stage? Or, Don has another twist on it. It's like, well, if you're under the weather, how does your technique actually save you in those situations as well? Or how do you adapt your technique?
Exactly. I mean, I'll address both things. Like in one way, if you've gotten really excited in a scene, and perhaps you've gotten too excited, or you haven't supported well enough, and you haven't taken the time to breathe and rest, and your voice feels tired, then in that moment you can kind of switch on stage into technique mode, and you're like, okay, how do I get through this? So I mean, for me, I think of the sound as being just a little slimmer, not quite as just, if I'm in a moment when I just need to get through, then I can sort of slim up my voice, and work through that. And singing when you're ill is a whole different, well, not different, it's kind of the same thing, but it is not fun. It's like if you were a surgeon and you ended up having hand cramps when you had to go in and do an open heart surgery. You feel very not like yourself. But your technique, is what can save you. If you sometimes you can, over the course of a phrase, sometimes you can build up a little tension just because you are really emotional in the scene that you're portraying. And if you're sick, sometimes you need to just recall on that emotion and focus on your technique. So there's sometimes it's about a mindset where you can be a little more mindful of how your voice is working as you go when you're sick than when you're feeling 100% and you're devoting 100% to your character.
Yeah, there's a great story about Beverly Sills. She recorded an album of Verdi arias with like 103 temperature. Was so sick that she forgot that she had recorded it, and someone gave it to her, and she's like, "Well, the only possible reason I could have gotten through that was because of technique, because her technique was so secure, very demanding arias, but so sick she forgot about recording them." So
Yeah, well, and I was in it was my Met debut, and I was singing Morales and Carmen, and Olga Borodina was singing Carmen, and she got sick through the middle of the run. And when you heard her speaking in the cast hallway, she sounded like how could she even produce a sound? She got it on stage and she sounded like $1,000,000. But it's changing your mindset to where you are judging for yourself, because it's not just about our sound, it's also about the sensation. So we've practiced enough about how it feels to where as you go through a performance or a rehearsal or whatever it is you're singing sick, then you are able to make those minor adjustments as you go because we're trained so well.
we have a question from Layla Brooks. She wanted to know what made you want to become a singer, besides the
Um,
side of things.
no, I mean, for me, I've the first time I ever went to the theater, I went to see my mom and dad subscribed to the Broadway series in Louisville, Kentucky, near where I'm from, and they thought that Annie would be the perfect first exposure for me to the theater. So they took me into what is now the Brown Theater in Louisville, Kentucky, and I sat down and the lights went down and I got all excited. And for us, for the whole evening, basically, it's like the theater disappeared, the audience disappeared. It was literally just as if it was me and the show going on and nothing else. I was completely transfixed. I remember even going home and asking my father to replace the light switch in my room with a dimmer switch so that I could make it more theatrical. So it was truly, it was just my experience of being in the theater that nothing has hit me like that before, and nothing since.
Julianne Green has, what advice do you have for young singers who want to pursue a career in classical music?
What advice? Well, I think the most important thing as you are looking toward a classical career is to have your core people that you trust implicitly. One of the things that, I mean, it's kind of strange to say this, but one of the things that any singer can never ever do is hear themselves sing. We can put our recording devices in the theater, we can listen to a broadcast, we can do all of these other things of recording our voices, but we can never have the experience of sitting with our own ears in the theater to hear what we sound like. So in that instance, you need your voice teacher, your coach, your conductor friends, the people who are kind of on Team Troy, who are there saying, you know, I know you said you felt really good about your performance, but there were these couple spots where I feel like you weren't supporting, or maybe you need to be sure at this moment you need to sing straight out into the house and not angle it all toward the wings because the orchestra's really, I mean, people who will be honest with you and say, you're being consistently flat. I think we need to work on that. Or, whatever problems might creep up, because, you know, sometimes in singing, you feel like you wake up with a different voice every day. So you need those people in your life who can help guide you as you go, and who are honest with you. That's the most important thing, because I mean, singing is different than just a playing ability. Like someone who plays the piano really well, you can compliment or criticize their ability, but not their instrument, because they didn't choose their instrument. So our instruments are a part of our body. It's like our nose or our ear or our eyes. So it's like a physical attribute. So when someone does a criticism of a singer, it's not just about ability, it's also about attribute. And sometimes I think that makes it more difficult for people to be honest.
Yeah. Uh, Great answer. Lisa Anderson asked, how much time does it generally take you to learn a new role? And what is your process to learn the role?
For me, it depends on the size of the role and depends on what language it's in. If it's something that I'm not as familiar in, like Russian is not one of my strongest languages. So I started to learn Eugene Onegin at least 6 months or more out to start just with the text, because it's very difficult for someone who's not a non-Russian speaker. For things like something that's in German, Italian, or French, it takes me a little less time. But for me, I always start with the text, because when a classical composer writes a piece, they start with a libretto. So you're doing half of the work of the composer if you just work on the libretto first, because all the rhythm, like all of the great composers, Mozart, Verdi, Donizetti, they all write the rhythms that are in the text. So if you learn the text very well, you basically don't have to look at the rhythms when you're learning. You almost can skip right to the pitches because you've learned the text so well. So that is one of the tools that I use consistently that makes my learning process a lot easier. And I find that by the time I've learned everything, I don't have to do a lot of memorization because of doing it in that process. So, I mean, sometimes you get a last minute request for something and you have to learn more quickly. And I have found that when that happens, you get it learned. Like I remember in our Mano Lescaut in Philadelphia, Michelle Johnson, who did a beautiful job, was a last minute replacement, and she was learning as we were staging. And I've done similar situations where you still have your score, and it becomes an impediment, especially when you're not used to it. But then 6 months later, you're like, oh, I just did 6 performances of that show, and you crack the score and you don't remember it because you learned it so quickly. So for me, I think it's a better investment to take several months to get a new role under your belt, because then if you put in that time, then you have it forever.
Yeah. Barbara Toms asks, is sort of like the last question, is there any one language that's more difficult to sing than others?
Um, well, I find that basically what I and most singers do, we kind of Italianize everything. We try to base everything on the five Italian vowels, and then we make adjustments according to the different languages from there. Um, for me, most importantly, in any language, is legato singing. I think
So what is legato?
even what legato singing. Sure, I guess I should explain that. Legato singing is when every single note is connected. Every vowel, it's like one strand, and everything flows around that strand, and you never break the beauty of the sound. So you think of something like the largo al factotum, um, which is very fast and crisp. Um, but for me, the secret to singing it well is to sing it legato. So you have is it because it's fast. Largo factotum della città. You think largo factotum della città. No, if you do it legato, largo factotum della città, largo. It's much easier, and everything is shaped around this one thing that's consistent, and you end up with less. It's way less tiring than if you're focusing on every single note. So I think in in any language, I think that is true.
Mhm.
And I think singers go toward the legato. Even when there are rests, you're still thinking about how you're connecting that note so that the note that comes before comes afterwards. And I think that, granted, there are strange, or strange is not the right word. There are vowels that we're not used to. If we, like in Russian, that you have to get used to saying. You have to kind of feel how those vowels work in your singing voice. But I think even the odd vowels that aren't natural to us, I think we go back to the Italianate way of singing, and we adjust it in that way too.
Yeah, great. There's a great quote from Callis, who said legato singing, and I'm paraphrasing, is like birds sitting on a wire, so that the consonants are their claws, but the sound is the vowels, so it's all connected through the entire line. We've got two questions that are by two different people but are related. Audrey Dorothy asked, how many different productions do you typically perform in a year? And Michael Blank wants to know, how far out are you booked?
We'll start it with the how far out are you booked. I do have something in 2021. As of now, I mean, it's a very weird, strange time we're all living in. So basically, I've had two of my upcoming jobs canceled, and the summer thing is, we don't know yet. But I'm just trying to plan ahead as if it's gonna go away. And let's hope that some of these things that are canceled, like what Opera Philadelphia is doing with Madame Butterfly, they end up just being postponed and then moved in the calendar, so that these great works can still be done. So what was the first part of the question?
And the first part is, how many different productions do you generally do?
Oh, it differs from year to year, depending on because some companies, like for example, Virginia Opera, they perform at 3 different venues, so their contracts tend to be a little longer. So if you're doing a Virginia Opera contract that takes up more time, then you have less opportunity. Or if you're doing a summer festival that's over the course of almost 3 months, that takes up a lot of time as well. But usually around 5 or 6 operas, and then perhaps some concerts here and there. You know, at Christmas time, there's always the Messiah season when you'll hopefully get to do some Messiahs, or for me, like Carmina Burana or something with the symphony orchestra, and maybe a recital or one of those kinds of opportunities as well.
AJ Wiley asks, what is one thing you wish conductors knew or were aware of that would help you and other opera singers? Don't mention any names.
Oh no, not at all. What? I mean, you know, most conductors are really fantastic, and I mean, I have to say, and this is, you know, hats off to Opera Philadelphia for having, you know, one of the best music directors and conductors in the world. Corrado, he's always my pocket conductor. So whenever I'm working through a score, when I look into my pocket and I'm like, well, what would Corrado do in this moment? You know, when I'm trying to make a decision, because he's just right about everything. I don't know, maybe sometimes I have maybe a pet peeve. I don't know if I should say this on the internet, but you know, I think sometimes if a conductor is kind of singing to themselves while they're conducting you, sometimes I feel like that they're not listening. And I find the most satisfying musical experiences are when everyone is in the same performance at the same time. And I understand we all have a certain way that we want things to go. And I guess it comes down to really utilizing the rehearsal time to where by the time we're performing, we have everybody on the same page. And sometimes, I mean, I guess maybe wishing a conductor knew this is a little different than wishing that we had a little more time with the conductor to really nail down some of the decisions to where you feel like the conductor is conducting you in the performance and not the ideal performance of La Boheme or Madame Butterfly or whatever that they have kind of going on in their mind and just trying to bring you along. Do you know what I guess maybe that's, and I think that's has more to do with how much rehearsal time we have, you know, because rehearsal time, especially with the orchestra, is not inexpensive. So
No, and I've been at performances where not in Philadelphia, but where you can hear the conductor singing along or humming along, and I completely understand where you're coming from.
yeah, I feel like they're conducting the performance in their mind and not the one that's on stage.
Yeah. It's the comment about the critics. The critic is always comparing the performance to their favorite recording.
Exactly.
We have another question from Michael Blank. He wanted to know, how do you feel about singing newer, maybe less melodic operas versus the more perennial standards?
Sure, I think it's exciting. I think New Works gives us the opportunity to sing about things that we live in our everyday lives. I think, you know, doing some of the Warhorse productions in a way that allows us to do that can also bring that element to our art form, but not in a way that a new work can. And for me, I still, even if the melody seems incredibly disjointed, or I still think of it as a melody, and I still sing it as such, and I learn it as such, because all the notes they have relationships, and you have to figure out melodically how to make that work. Because for an audience, we are the interpreter. We are their key into understanding this difficult music. And if we fight against that, if we don't embrace it as a melody, as in the same way that we did, you know, a bel canto aria, then I think we're doing the audience members a disservice.
Mm-hmm. So do you find that if you are studying a new score based upon your method of learning them, that they tend to stay with you as far as memory longer because it's more, maybe perhaps more challenging to learn?
Oh, well, it takes a lot more time to find the relationships between the notes when, you know, if it's 12 tone, or if it's serious, if it seems so arbitrary, then it definitely takes time in order to find the melodic relationships that that you can kind of justify, even with something like Benjamin Britten,
Mhm.
who when you first start learning Benjamin Britten, it always feels very challenging until one moment when it all clicks and you couldn't imagine it being any other way. And it's very similar to learning a language. They're just syllables, and then they're just words, and then they're just phrases, and then eventually they become sentences and conversations.
Yep, 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 yep.
And I think that we have to put in that work in order to make an audience, or to give them the fighting chance to be able to accept this music. Because very often you hear something that's very challenging and you come out just enjoying the show and enjoying the story without exactly an awareness of just how difficult it is.
Right. We have another question from Anna Lipowitz. At what point in your career, or what moment, did you realize that you had actually made it as an opera singer?
I'm still waiting for that moment, I think. I mean, I've been very lucky to have a pretty full calendar for most of my years in my career. So I look back at that, and I think, as far as making it, I mean, some people look at, have you sung at the Met? And that's your metric for having made it, or have you made a European debut? Is that your metric for having made it? But for me, at the end of the day, I think it's about you're as good as your last performance. And for me, I continue to try to make it every time I go into a rehearsal room, or walk into the theater or the concert hall for a performance, because I think I'm still learning. I'm a student of this art form, and I will always be that. And I feel like there. I think it just depends on your metric. And for me, it doesn't matter if I'm going to Shreveport Opera to do something, or if I'm walking through the doors of Covent Garden. It's still me. It's still my performance. The quality for me doesn't change. My attitude about it doesn't change. And for me, it's work. I'm a working singer. And at the end of the day, I am very thankful for that.
Yeah. I think we should probably leave it at that, because we've been on for just about 45 minutes. I wanted to first off thank you, Troy, because this has been.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I have. It's just been always such a articulate and thoughtful in your responses to these kinds of questions. I can't thank you enough. For those of you who are viewing us, don't forget that subscriptions for the 2020-2021 season are on sale. You may have just gotten your brochures in the mail just recently. Festival 020 features an amazing lineup. We have Sandra Ravanowski making her role debut as Lady Macbeth in Verdi's Macbeth. We have the world premiere of Jennifer Higdon's second opera, Woman with Eyes Closed. That'll be at the Perelman. The libretto for that opera is by Jerry Dye. Hans Werner Henze's amazing monodrama, El Cimarron, will feature the great Sir Willard White. That'll be an exciting piece. And then, of course, as we always do, we have some fun recitals with afternoons at AVA and Curtis in concert, plus the return of the Bearded Ladies with late night snacks as part of the festival. Coming in January of next year, January 2020, we have Stravinsky's, one of my favorite pieces, Stravinsky's Oedipus Rex, with a great cast featuring William Burden, Brianna Tellwell, Mark S. Doss, and Sir Willard White again. And then next spring, a really spectacular lineup with the return of Puccini's Tosca, three singers making their role debuts and Opera Philadelphia debuts, Anna Maria Martinez, Piero Preti, and then also Quinn Kelsey. Very exciting production for this. And then also thank you again, everybody, for taking some time out, whether you're at home or in this quarantine, you've decided to spend your afternoon with us, and we can't thank you enough for joining us and in your own way supporting Opera Philadelphia. It's incredibly helpful in so many ways now more than ever. So thank you for taking the time today. If you have questions about this or comments or ways we can improve, you can, email us at events@operaphila.org. And then we can use that as we move forward with some of these virtual events. But look for more events as we move forward in this new but hopefully temporary time that we're in. Thank you again, Troy, for joining us, and thank you all for spending today with us at Between the Notes. Have a great day.